Ladies and gentlemen, welcome in. We've got a critical update on the current tariff situation. Donald Trump has imposed heavier tariffs on many small countries. Trump is trying to elevate the U.S. tariff revenue. We're already around $22-23 billion per month, possibly going up to maybe $30 billion per month with these recent tariff increases. Trump has extended the initial deadline. We know if you go back on Liberation Day, Trump a few days later said, all right, it's going to be a 10% global tariff. We'll give you 90 days. Well, the 90 days is up on July 9th, which would be tomorrow. And so that's why there was a race for all these deals. That's why Trump's announcing all of this when it comes to some of these tariffs. But there is an extended deadline for a few of the bigger countries to August 1st. And Trump has said in a statement on Truth Social that this is it. August 1st is the final deadline when it comes to negotiations. Seems like there's potentially going to be a deal with the European Union that's going to keep their tariffs around 10%. There could potentially be deals with Brazil, maybe even Japan and South Korea still maybe negotiating, even with the recent hike in tariff that Trump has on them. You can see Japan and South Korea both hit with a 25% tariff. So that's 10% to 25% is what that is, because Japan and South Korea already had the baseline 10%, and so now it's raised. And I would imagine Japan and South Korea can still negotiate with the United States until August 1st, but after August 1st, the tariff policy is set, and you can see a number of these smaller countries where we don't do much trade with them getting hit. Again, these tariffs are going from 10% to 25%, 10% to 25%, 10% to 30%, 10% to 40%, 10% to 40%. 10% to 35%. You can see it's going up. Cambodia 36, Indonesia 32, Thailand 36, Bosnia 30, Tunisia 25. So they're all going up by at least 15, 20, 25, 30%. And so what is the ultimate strategy here? Well, let's go back to Trump and his initial goal with the tariffs. He wanted to make so much revenue to where we could really cut into the deficit. Trump originally imposed tariffs back in 2018. Biden kept them on. We were making probably around 120, 130 billion dollars per year in tariff revenue. Since Trump has started imposing the current tariffs, this is a new administration. This is his new policy. It's completely different than his policy in his first term, where it was really just focused on China. This is more of a global thing. We've taken the revenue from around 130 billion to possibly 350 billion, maybe even more with these recent tariff hikes. You can't be for sure because Trump has said, well, August 1st is the deadline. There is the possibility some of these smaller countries can negotiate these tariffs down with the United States depending on what they give us in negotiation. You're looking at maybe the bigger countries, Japan and South Korea, potentially negotiating their tariffs down. Whether, I mean, they might not. We know Trump has a pretty hefty tariff on China. And this is something that Trump wants. He wants to generate a significant amount of money. He's taken it. We've made an extra potentially an extra $200 billion per year in tariff revenue if the consistent numbers of around $25 billion is legitimate, and that's how much, because you can't really be for sure in terms of, well, monthly, this is how much we're going to take in, because you're going to be dealing with companies not wanting to pay that tariff. They're going to create domestically and produce domestically, which is what we want, and that's the overall purpose. But it's something to where, well, you're not going to be making tariff revenue if companies say, well, we're just gonna make in the United States, which again is the purpose of it, but it does bring down the tariff revenue overall. So what is the actual goal here? Why would Trump impose all these tariffs and say, you know what, we're doing a 10% flat rate, we're going to give you 3 months, and maybe we can work out all of these different trade deals? And people kind of had theorized that, oh, we were going to do all these deals with all these countries. It was going to be this free trade thing. It was going to be amazing. We were going to have a deal every single day. Obviously, that hasn't happened. And with a lot of these smaller countries, it really doesn't matter. I think what Trump is doing is he's seeing how much he can push this tariff revenue without it becoming inflationary. Because when Trump first put it in the tariffs, he took them off. It was down to the 10% global tariffs. Liberals, everyone said, they're like, oh, it's going to be inflationary. This is going to be terrible. We did not see the inflation effect out of Trump's first 4 months in office. 3 of them, the core inflation numbers were lower than the expected overall number. And now we've got trueflation at 1.75%. A lot of that is thanks to energy going down, but still, that is a very low inflation rate. Trueflation, which is the most accurate measure of overall inflation, under 2%. And if you look at trueflation from when Trump entered to where we are now, it has been a very consistent downward trend in terms of inflation. Trump has done very, very well on limiting inflation. Now you have to do it for a prolonged period of time for it to actually show up in terms of the polling, because Trump still has a very negative rating when people judge him on inflation, because we've dealt with the higher prices for so long and people are so negative. Even with gas, which indisputably across the nation is lower. Now, maybe certain areas it's not, but overall it is lower. Of course, in my area, it's like 259, hasn't been 259 since before the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And so we realize all of that. That's going to help Trump. That's going to help the economy. And even with the situation, even with, you could say, well, Trump, it's really not him. But think about it. Crude oil could have gone off the rails. Trump handled the situation in 12 days. Israel, Iran. It was a get in, get out operation. People clown. They said, oh, that's not how it works. Well, that's what happened. It was get in, get out. And now they say there's going to be another situation. We don't know that. That might not happen under Trump. We don't know. So you're just estimating on that. But either way, Trump wants to siphon as much tariff revenue as he can possible off of these countries. That's the point. So you bring a Bangladesh tariff from a 10% to a 35%. We barely do any trade with Bangladesh anyways. And so it doesn't really matter if their tariff is 10% or 35%. At the end of the day, and the people say, well, it's going to be inflationary. Obviously not. We've seen how this works out in a competitive capitalist market in the United States. If you have to compete with other companies, they're going to undercut your price. You've got to keep your prices low. Your profit margins are going to probably decrease, or the countries are going to have to produce the items for cheaper. Like Bangladesh or Cambodia, if they're very reliant on the U.S. consumer base, you're going to have to make your product even cheaper, which you could argue, well, maybe that's a bit of a problem. But the point is we are trying to see how much we can take this tariff revenue without it being inflationary. And it seems like Trump is perfectly fine with doing trial and error. Maybe things go off the rails for a month. I mean, that's what happened in April. I don't think the same thing is going to happen now. I mean, look at how the markets are reacting now versus the Liberation Day stuff. It's not even close, because with Liberation Day, I mean, a lot of these tariffs were not 35%. They were 120% because it was based off the deficit we had with these countries. So it's a lot more tame than the Liberation Day stuff was. And we've already got the deal worked out with China, even though they're still being hit with tariffs. Doesn't surprise me they're still being hit with tariffs. It's not a free trade. There's no free trade with China based on how they undercut us in terms of labor costs. So there's always going to be tariffs on China. There should be. Even liberals agree. That's why they kept tariffs on China, and we were able to generate, even under liberals, $130 billion in tariff revenue, in the early 2020s. That's kind of weird to say, the early 2020s. From 2021 to 2025, under Biden, we generated, $130 billion. Now we're generating potentially, if this holds, 350, maybe, I mean, with these tariffs being upped, if this sticks, maybe upwards of 400 billion. Maybe upwards of 400 billion. And, when you talk about the deficit and people say, well, it's $2 trillion and Trump is raising it, you can cut into it with 400 billion. And that's not even really the government spending in terms of the deficit. Half of our deficit is interest payments. Once the interest rates go down to 2%, that interest payment's going to be cut in half. Imagine it's $1 billion. What is it? $1 trillion interest payment. It could be 500 billion if we get 2% interest rates. We've got 4.5% interest rates right now. That's why they're trying to get rid of Powell by 2026, because they need the interest rates to come down. But even you look at all the key indicators, they're saying the interest rates, we're going to get at least 2, maybe 3 cuts. It's basically guaranteed by Q1 of 2026. So that's also being reported. But you take a look at this stuff, and this doesn't surprise me that Trump is doing this. He came out a few weeks ago and signaled and said, well, with some of these countries, we don't even care. We're just going to tell you, this is your tariff. We're done with it. You're a small country. We barely trade with you anyways. We're going to siphon as much money as possible in this revenue. And then liberals say, well, the consumer pays for it. Obviously not. You're just making stuff up. The consumer pays for it. Then why isn't it reflective in inflation? Why has inflation been lower? Trump puts these crazy, what liberals considered catastrophic tariffs that were going to destroy the economy somehow and cause us to have a recession. Well, no, we've got 4.5% growth rate. They're still saying that we're going to have, and now the cope is, Q3 just started, right? So they say, well, Q3, Q4 are, I guess, going to be negative growth. That we're going to see contractions to where we're going to have a recession. Yeah, we're really going to have a terrible contraction in Q3 and Q4 when we're due for at least 2 or 3 rate cuts. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. See how desperate these people are? They're the ones that said, well, we had a 0.5 contraction in Q1, so it's a guaranteed rate cut. They had to stop saying that because of the Atlanta Fed estimate. And they said, well, we have to admit it's a 4.5% growth rate. I don't know if it's actually going to be that, but it's going to be a significant growth rate. And this is really imports versus exports when it comes to kind of how we had the contraction in Q1 versus the growth in Q2. But now we're getting to the point in this stage in the economy to where, you know, with Trump's big, beautiful bill, this is very bullish. You could say, well, these tariff things, this could be a little bit, you know, short term, it could be a problem. The markets will be fine. This is nothing crazy. I think we could still work out deals with some of these countries. This is what Trump does. He imposes the tariffs. It's pressure. It's pressure. Make these countries act. And so this is just his negotiating style. Some of these countries, I think, are going to try and negotiate with the United States because he said the new deadline is August 1st, and he's done after August 1st. And at a certain point, your tariff policy has to be done. We don't want any more. I mean, this is still Trump's first year. So let's get this out of the way in the first 7 or 8 months, the first 3 quarters of Trump's first or second term. Let's just get all of this out of the way, and then we'll have an actual tariff policy. And this is the tariff. It's a 50% tariff on China or 35% tariff on China. It's a 25% tariff on South Africa and, you know, Japan and South Korea, depending. Maybe we'll negotiate with Japan and South Korea. I know Trump has been very disappointed, and the Japanese have been frustrating to negotiate with. That's what the administration says. And I think we're going to get the major deal with the EU. That's going to be worked out. Trump has basically said, all right, we'll do a 10% tariff on you guys. We'll just keep it at 10% on the EU. And we've already got a deal done with the UK. Brazil is another country we're looking at. So there's a number of these countries, and we'll see what ends up happening. But he's already started to slap these heavier tariffs. I mean, again, these go from 10% to 35%, 10% to 36%. And so they're all going up by 15, 20, 30%. That's going to be more tariff revenue for us, but it's not like we trade with these countries a lot. The much easier way to make a bunch of money would be to tariff China at 140%, but that's not sustainable. That would cause an inflationary effect if you do 140%. That's just the reality. And I'm not saying you couldn't say, well, that's an autocorrect and that's fine and we can deal with it. But when you're talking about a presidential term, it's a tough thing to deal with because it would take years to probably recover from that. And you could argue, well, that would be a healthy recovery because it would force at that point more domestic production and less reliance on China. But again, with the way these presidents operate and someone like Trump, you have the midterms in about a year and 2-3 months. It's a problem if you kept that 140% on, because you're talking about in economic terms, it's going to be a while before we recover, and we can recover from something like that. But it would be, you know, if you kept 140% tariff on China, you would be dealing with inflation and other problems. And that's the issue in terms of not being able to get the rate cuts. But the rate cuts have got to be coming. This is just great news. And so these tariffs are, yeah, you're going to put more tariffs on countries. I mean, you're going to hit a lot of these countries. It's like 20 countries getting slapped with higher tariffs. And so the point is, we will try and create a situation to where we can generate as much revenue as possible without it being too inflationary. And we're balancing it to where we're generating an extra $200 billion per year annually, while also getting 2 or 3 rate cuts, while also having, think about what Trump has done. We imagine if by 2026, we are able to bring down the interest rates to about 2.5%. I mean, it seems very bullish, maybe mid 2026. I mean, this is going to save us a significant amount of money in terms of the deficit. Now, it's not going to eliminate the deficit or anything like that because of our military spending, because a few other things, and just spending on the entitlements. You can't even cut there's not, you know, you try and do something with the entitlements, which is actually popular when you localize it. It's just like the able-bodied people. When you localize that issue, it's popular. So if it's a state-to-state issue, it's popular what Trump is doing. But then liberals blow it up. They're like, well, Trump just got rid of all of Medicare. It's gone. Or Medicaid. Trump just got rid of all of Medicaid. It's gone. Really? That's not what happened at all. But they just say it, and it's like, oh, they're Medicaid. No. This is a popular thing. It's able-bodied people who aren't working right now. It's illegals. And then how about the PSYOP where they say illegals are not on Medicaid? And we literally have somebody getting fact-checked by Grok, where Grok's like, yeah, California instituted this policy. Yes, this is the reason. Why do you think we're able to cut $70 or $80 billion per year in Medicaid spending? They're like, liberals or illegals are not on it. Well, then how can we cut billions of dollars per year by taking illegals off Medicaid? It's just this weird psyop. We can prove it. We have the numbers. You get fact checked by the freaking AI. And they just say they're not on it. How do you believe that? Well, let's ask. I mean, so where are we getting the money from? Why are we able to save $80 billion? It's not just from the able-bodied people being taken off. It's not just from the able-bodied people being taken off. So think about that. But this tariff stuff, I mean, look, he's trying to siphon more money. This is what Trump does. And so some of this is, it's negotiations. You put a 25% tariff, you do a deal. There's other things they give in, and you work it out. And so, some of these tariffs are going to stay in place though, because Trump wants more money. Trump wants the revenue to be maybe 400 billion per year in tariffs, and this is just, they have no argument. What is the liberal argument now? They're not inflationary. The inflation rate since Trump has entered has gone down. He's beaten expectations on it, and we're generating an extra $200 billion. Now you can say, well, these new tariffs, they're the ones that are going to be inflationary. Okay, or there's a lag of 7 or 8 months, and eventually, but now they're getting to the point to where there's not even a real cope they can have. Because how does a president come in, generate an extra $200 billion and lower inflation when they said it would be inflationary? And that's the negative aspect of the tariffs. And on top of that, you're going to get more domestic production. And it's really happening in the auto industry, the automobile industry, significant domestic factories being built, and manufacturers saying, yeah, we have to produce in the United States. And the manufacturers will be like, Trump, are you serious about this? Are the tariffs going to stay in place? Trump says, yeah, we're doing them. The auto tariffs at 25% on Canada, they're staying in. The steel tariffs are staying. And then they're like, all right, we're going to produce in the United States. We have to do it. We have to give America quality jobs. You've done it, sir. Congratulations. Think about it. But by the way, I don't know what's going on with Canada and Mexico. You'd think there's going to be a renegotiated trade deal with them. But somebody told me something about it. I forgot. Somebody said something in the chat about Canada and Mexico. But either way, guys, make sure you like the video down below. Also follow me on X. Link to that's always in the description.